Hello, class. I hope everyone is doing well and having a fantastic weekend. Thanks for your time today. Our team selected crisis intervention theory for this class project. As a therapeutic approach, it simply means that we are intervening with consumers in an immediate and short-term psychological triage setting to help people cope with an emotional crisis. What is a crisis? A crisis is considered to be an event determined by the following criteria: exposure to an acute emotional upset, created in a situational, developmental, and sociocultural context. And because we have an inability to cope using our everyday skills we would normally employ, the result is a crisis. Our solution is crisis intervention. The goal of the intervention is to restore equilibrium to the biopsychosocial components of the person's life. In due course, we hope the individual's daily functioning will return to what they consider to be normal. Secondly, crisis theory intervention hopes to mitigate the long-term impact of the psychologically traumatic event. Crisis intervention first developed 4 decades ago following the Coconut Grove fire in Boston in 1942. A great need arose to help hundreds of people cope with their grief. Eric Lindemann, then psychiatrist-in-chief at Mass General Hospital, pioneered work in this area. He studied the long-term impact of grief on people. Over the next 2 decades, Gerald Kaplan in the 40s and 50s continued work on the theory even when it was unpopular to do so. Erik Erikson and colleagues and many mental health professionals worked in collaboration to expand the theory. As soldiers returned home from World War II, post-traumatic stress disorder was recognized, becoming part of the American vernacular. A need for intervention therapies that would be successful was addressed to an extent by this approach. Crisis theory intervention is also given credit for the creation and evolution of suicide hotlines in the 1970s.
Crisis intervention is defined as a focused, short-term intervention seeking to resolve a crisis. While crisis intervention is typically time-limited and short-term, it's important to note that a crisis can last for days or weeks, and that the intervention period is based on each individual crisis. That said, if a crisis is left unresolved and becomes ongoing for even a couple of weeks, other issues may arise. For example, chronic stress. As stated in applying theory to generalist social work practice, the crisis no longer exists, but its effects continue. When working with a client in a crisis, engagement and assessment occur simultaneously and efficiently. Because there is an immediate need for intervention, engaging with clients and building a rapport is a process that intertwines with assessment. When assessing, we're looking at the presenting problem and the issues that need to be addressed immediately. Being able to establish a connection with your clients in crisis and building a rapport is vital in crisis intervention. What with the fast-paced efforts to resolve the issue at hand, partnered with the deeply personal experiences that our clients may be working through, being able to connect is an important element in helping clients return to their previous levels of functioning, which is one of the purposes of crisis intervention. Another purpose of crisis intervention is to meet concrete and emotional needs through the provision of services. When a client presents with a crisis, we want to meet these needs through our services. As previously stated, we work first to address the immediate needs. From that point, we work with our clients to continue to help meet their needs through follow-up services.
This definition by Roberts is useful in understanding that a crisis is unique to the person and to the circumstances, and what is a crisis for one person might not be a crisis for another, yet everyone will experience a crisis at some point in their life. In a way, all counselors are crisis counselors, as we all have clients who are sometimes in crisis. So it's important to remain flexible in our approach and to be able to Here are a couple of specific intervention approaches that help us understand how theory can be applied in the application of help in crisis situations. The first is psychological first aid, which is an intervention that is designed to disrupt the client's dysfunctional behavior and return him or her to their previous level of functioning as soon as possible. On the other hand, we have multimodal therapy, which is not designed specifically for crisis situations, but is proven to be very useful because of the comprehensive and quick assessment process that it includes, and also because it is in nature designed to be very crisis often occurs outside of disaster settings. There are many problems that can put people into crisis situations frequently, and some of these include addiction, having a dual diagnosis disorder, being involved in intimate partner violence, sexual abuse, or having an eating disorder. So while crisis therapists are encouraged to remain flexible in their approach, like having several therapeutic approaches that can be used to support people in these situations is critical.
The next two slides highlight the strengths and limitations in regards to the crisis theory. When looking at the strengths, there are several that can be found that help us as clinicians to be able to utilize this theory effectively in our line of work. First, models and protocols used in an assessment and intervention are adaptable. This is important because within our profession we are confronted with many different types of situations from our clients, so it is important to have a theory that is adaptable to any situation that we encounter. Next, flexibility of the stages of a crisis accommodate cultural differences. This is also an important strength because as social workers it is extremely important to be able to work with each culture that a client identifies with. The strength that research validates using the crisis theory in assessment and intervention is important because it shows us, as clinicians, that it is a strong theory that is backed by research. The next couple of strengths have to do with the application of the theory. The crisis theory's models are straightforward and easy to remember, the theory is short-term and problem-oriented, and a joint relationship is formed to create a goal. When looking at the limitations of the crisis theory, there are a couple that have been found to limit this theory's use in the social work profession. First, clinicians have to move quickly to establish rapport. This can be a limitation because sometimes it takes a little longer to form a trusting relationship between the client and the clinician, which could impact the use of the crisis theory. Secondly, the crisis theory and intervention can intensify the problem if the clinician doesn't fully understand the model. Next, the intervention is time limited. If a problem extends beyond a 4 to 6 week time frame, a referral to other services may be in order. Finally, at the point of intervention, a wide variety of methods may be used by the clinician. This is a limitation because it makes it more difficult to measure the effectiveness of the model versus the effectiveness of the intervention modality. The use of the crisis theory in social work not only helps the client, but allows for the social worker to gain some useful tools to use when working with a client in crisis. It is important for a social worker to utilize a conceptual model that moves them through the stages in a logical and productive way. By utilizing the crisis theory, it helps the social worker to focus on the strengths and resilience of the client. It needs to be noted that a crisis can happen at any time to anyone. So the crisis theory is helpful because it provides a type of intervention for the client that allows them to lean on the social worker for support. Through the use of the crisis theory, a client can overcome the crisis and learn to cope with the help of a social worker and the crisis theory. But in order for this to happen, a social worker must quickly assess the situation, build rapport with the client, and offer concrete as well as psychological support. This presentation was completed by Cynthia Edenfield, Laura McKeon, Victoria Hoover, and Mackenzie Fisher.